Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The Landscape Research Group. My name is Sarah Lawton. I'm the new Director of Communications and Membership for the Landscape Research Group. As you can tell, I'm quite new at the webinar thing. Somehow I managed to avoid them all through lockdown. Not quite sure how. Usually I had to set them up, but never had to run them. So forgive my blips and messing up. Happily, everyone on here is more professional than I am. So I just want to give you a very quick introduction to the Landscape Research. We're an international charity that supports critical interdisciplinary work on landscapes and the relationships people have with them. We bring researchers, practitioners, activists, and communities together to explore how landscapes are shaped, how they change, and how they can be managed more equitably and sustainably. If you're not already involved with the LRG, we encourage you to consider membership. We are a charity. Our members help guide our work and gain access to events, funding opportunities, and a global community of landscape thinkers. You can also sign up to our newsletter, which shares upcoming activities, calls for papers and contributions, project updates, and opportunities to participate in our programmes. I'd also like to highlight the Lex Landscape Exchange. Lex is our online platform for sharing case studies, methods, reflections, and creative work from around the world. We welcome contributions from all disciplines and career stages to go on this smorgasbord of landscape content, which we will be sharing more widely with the community. LRG also hosts a range of networks, including regional and thematic groups, and we run regular networking events, workshops, and discussions. We also hold informal coffee meetups, which are more regional and offer a friendly space for members across the world to connect, share ideas, and build community more locally to them. We hope today's session inspires you to stay connected with us, contribute to Lex, join a network, or become a member. You can find all the details on our website, landscaperesearch.org. So, that said, welcome one and all. I can now hand you over to Dr. Meram Kellig.
Hello, welcome everyone. Good morning and maybe good evening for those who are joining us from the eastern part of the world. I hope you're having a great day so far. I'd like to welcome you all to our long-awaited December event. This is one of LRG's flagship gatherings, where we bring together notable speakers to explore timely landscape topics that align closely with our research strategy. Today, we turn our attention to methods for understanding landscape change. We are living in a world shaped by unprecedented and fast-paced transformations, from climate change, more than human dynamics, wars and displacement, rapid urbanization and depopulation, to many other forces that continually reshape our landscapes. These complexities challenge us to rethink how we observe, interpret, and understand landscape processes, as no meaningful action can take place without a solid foundation of understanding. And this is where landscape researchers play a vital role. In this session, we explore new, innovative, and expanding methods and tools for understanding landscape change, from AI and machine learning to oral histories and archives. Together, we will learn from landscape scholars from across the globe who are pioneering approaches that broaden our perspectives on change. So before we begin, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Mirham, and I have been the research coordinator for LRG since February 2024, as well as a trustee since 2021. I am an assistant professor in the Urban Design and Planning Department at Ain Shams University in Cairo, Egypt, and I also serve as an associate editor of the Landscape Research Journal. I'm delighted to be moderating today's session for a topic that is very close to my heart. Before we move to our speakers, just a few housekeeping points. We encourage all attendees to submit their questions in the Q&A chat box at any time during the session. Please note that the session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. We will begin with the presentations from our panel, followed by a dedicated Q&A period. During the Q&A, you are welcome to unmute yourself and engage directly, or you may continue to type your questions in the chat if you prefer. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Each one of them brings a unique perspective and methodological expertise, and we are grateful to have them with us today. First, we will start with Dr. Sonya Cotton, who is a postdoctoral researcher at Dublin City University. Dr. Sonya is a socio-legal researcher whose work examines how international law frames land, personhood, and collective identity. Her doctoral research explored how legal concepts of property and placelessness shape spatial injustice in post-apartheid Southern Africa. So her title for today is Landscape Needs Informal International Law and International Laws Need Landscape, Reflections on Law's Misrecognition of Community. Thank you for joining us, Sonia, and the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks. Thanks so much for that. I'm just going to share my screen. Yes. Okay. Hi, thank you. Oh, okay. Continue to share. Thank you so much for that introduction. So I only think I have 10 minutes to speak, so I'm going to be very ambitious and try to talk about all of international law. But I kind of wanted to start off with a bit of a polemic that maybe landscape doesn't need international law, but I think it does. So I'm going to talk about my doctoral research, which where the concept of landscape was really, really useful in trying to rethink the placelessness in international law's conception of personhood and how that's actually affecting the ability of people on the ground or grassroots communities to reimagine maybe more just and like sustainable modes of collective existence. So I first want to kind of situate where my project fits in. I am for my PhD, I was part of an ERC project that looked at how international law is doing really exciting things at the moment. But the problem is it's being obstructed by this very strong dominant paradigm of property that is so all the innovations in human rights and environmental law and cultural heritage are kind of being it's difficult to get past the hurdle of property. So this project run by PI Amy Strecker is called Property and Justice, and it asks, how does international law's conceptualization of land as property facilitate spatial injustice? And it draws on a lot of critical legal geographers and people working within the tradition of landscape to take a more place-based approach to international law. And we're also using Kenneth Ulwig's concept of the substantive landscape, whereby landscape isn't something that you look at, but it can also, and historically was conceived of as the nexus of community, justice, nature, and environmental equity. And how does this fit into my own research? So from the 1990s, there was a proliferation in all sorts of international laws of the recognition that local communities have place-based rights in land. And you see this in environmental law and cultural heritage law and human rights law. And this has been seen as very exciting and, maybe a way in which international law is becoming decolonized or becoming more democratic. But my research question asked, there isn't really a definition of the local community. The term is just bandied around, and it starts to be normatively conflated with other types of collective persons that do have clearly articulated rights, but such as Indigenous peoples. So in that context, my research looked so generally, what does it mean to be a community in international law with respect to collective rights and land? and how does this work in geographies such as post-apartheid South Africa and Namibia, where the majority of the population was kind of imposed in these very homogenized racial categories, and now. Yeah, how does it work for communities who ambiguously fit within apartheid, racial, and colonial schema? Can they draw on international law to safeguard place-based rights and land? And conversely, how are those groups seeking to use international law constructed as not communities by the states or developers? And thus they lose their legal standing to challenge decisions being made on communal land. So you might have a legitimate claim, but if you can't show that if you don't fit the criteria of legal personhood, that claim will be dismissed. And finally, what is the impact of international law's conceptual ambiguity on the meaning of community, on spatial justice in general? And usually at this part of the talk, I would like to, talk about my positionality as a white South African doing research that, how my identity enables me certain affordances and limitations to this work. But in the interest of time, I will go through this slide quite quickly, but just add the following disclaimer. So in international law, there's a very strong differentiation between groups that are recognized as peoples versus those that are local communities. And so indigenous peoples have place-based rights in land, but local communities don't. And as a result, in cases where there's ambiguity, there's sometimes communities will try draw on the stronger rights, but they will be constructed as a weaker type of collective person in international law. And I don't like to, I'm not gatekeeping or adjudicating the authenticity of those claims at all. My focus is on the possibilities of international law to be used as a tool in place-based mobilization for landscapes. Okay, so this is a very grand project, and because I'm looking at how does the international scale of international law's possibilities connect to these very specific place-based examples, and I'm using approaches to international law that take place very seriously, and they think about how international laws. How international law kind of remains ontologically embedded in a sort of post-Enlightenment kind of concepts, and how can that be changed? Sorry, how many minutes am I on? Okay. Yes. Oops, sorry. So I'm trying to do this kind of grand international doctrinal research, and look at how it manifests in these particular case studies. So that involved legal ethnography, use of archives, and genuinely trying to connect the placelessness of international law's meaning of community to these very in-place examples. By physically going there. And I think using a concept like substantive justice, which doesn't try to depoliticize justice, was very important in choosing what kind of methodologies I use for fieldwork. So to what extent, how can I as a researcher avoid, as far as possible, using extractivist methods that, or how can I, as much as possible, encourage reflexivity in like my own position in the research. So I blocked out including my own face in these photos because I don't think that's important, but trying as far as possible to use tools like activist ethnography, whereby I use my tools and networks as a international legal researcher to try to be useful to these kinds of place-based movements that are really articulating for new types of collective existence that don't replicate this kind of a chauvinistic apartheid prism of grouping. And in my final minutes, I'm going to try to do this very, very, very quickly, but I wanted to kind of give an example of the types of research that can emerge through this very multimodal, multi-scalar approach to international law. So one of my case studies, I look at a group in Namibia who had an unsuccessful land claim. And I look at how this is a group of people who were essentially, they didn't fit easily in apartheid categories, which wanted to make a very clear separation between native and non-native, but their legal status kept on shifting according to the political aspirations of the apartheid state. And then when Namibia got its independence in 1990, according to the new regime. So they had a very strong a collective identity bound up in collective land use of a place called Rehoboth, and in apartheid they were kind of recognized as one of the like ethno-states racialized ethno-states recognized by the regime to try and classify people, but they were always told because of they had ancestry that was both European and indigenous. They were kind of their status. Whenever they tried to petition the United Nations, they were told, no, you're a native, you have to listen to South Africa, they're the boss. But then when they tried to petition for their land to the South African regime, they were told, no, you're too indigenous, you don't, like they're basically, or you're too close to European to be getting these rights. And then eventually, when Namibia got its independence in 1990, they lost their collective land was taken, and they challenged this. And the Namibian courts basically said that this community only wants their collective land back because they are trying to replicate apartheid, and that they were working with the apartheid government, and in like a very cruel kind of representation of this community that denied how diverse the views were, and how they had actually worked really hard to petition the United Nations against apartheid. And this community ended up taking this case to the United Nations Human Rights Committee under Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights. It grants land rights to groups that are recognized as indigenous peoples or minorities. And they said that their collective rights in land had been violated by this confiscation. And the committee said, no, your culture isn't distinctive enough to qualify for this right. So the case was dismissed on that ground. So I think this really indicates how both at a kind of local concepts of self-belonging can be they can be in conflict with national kind of geopolitical aspirations, and collusions with international law that remains embedded in these kind of colonial ontologies of what collective personhood should look like. So just to conclude, I think this type of research shows international law's duality, that on the one hand, in all the cases I looked at, international law played this amazing part in local imaginaries of different types of collective existence, and people use that as this aspirational norm and drew on things like recent innovations in like the rights of peasants or the rights of indigenous peoples. But at the same time, there remain these ontologies of collective personhood that are that can be quite colonial, and the benefits of a substantive landscape approach is that it takes the locus of authority and self-definition away from experts and away from politicians, and it embeds it in the community but in place, which is something that doesn't currently exist in international law, but I think has a lot of potential. So I'll leave there, but yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sonia, for this really interesting approach and presentation. And now we'll be giving the floor to Joy Burgess from South Africa to the UK, back again. Well, Joy is a lecturer in landscape studies at the University of Liverpool. Her work focuses on the history of women and the professionalization of landscape architecture, drawing on oral histories, archival collections, and feminist methodologies. Her research highlights overlooked contributors to the field and examines how professional identity, memory, and landscape practice intersect. Her presentation for today will be titled Recovering Lost Voices, Oral Histories in the Making and Remaking of Landscapes. Please, Joy, thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can I just confirm that you can see my screen okay?
Yes, all is good.
Lovely. Well, yeah, thank you for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. It's very nice to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit today about oral history and co-produced archives as important methods for understanding landscape change through a historical lens. So I'll begin by discussing some broad ideas around the use of oral history and historical research, and then I'll briefly turn to 3 example sites in post-war British landscape architecture, all by the designer Mary Mitchell, where uncovering their histories has been shaped and enriched by these methods. So when Rebecca Solnit wrote in her book, The Mother of All Questions, that if libraries hold all the stories that have been told, there are ghost libraries of all the stories that have not. The ghosts outnumber the books by some unimaginably vast sum. She was drawing attention to the sustained structural exclusion of women from histories by showing that for every story written, countless others are left untold. This echoes Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's earlier 2009 TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, in which she gave a warning around the risks of allowing a dominant narrative to stand in for the complexity of lived experience. A single story, she argues, flattens people, place, and histories into something partial and misleading. Feminist research has now long established that histories have been written of men and for men, and as such are shaped by the priorities, perspectives, and power of a narrow elite. When we look at the historiography of the design professions, we see disciplinary histories also reflect this bias. This can be seen in the way our understanding of architecture and landscape architecture is structured around a narrow set of heroic designers, particular types of design landscapes, and forms of practice. As a reaction to this narrow historical approach, there's been a sustained effort, particularly in feminist, social and decolonial scholarship, to address this history of silence by expanding who and what is deemed a worthy historical subject. This work recognises the value of diverse actors and situated forms of knowledge that conventional histories have tended to overlook. It's within this context that scholars began to also recognise the need to examine traditional historical methods as a means of accessing the past. The archive has always stood as the most common site of historical research, and yet its contested nature is rarely scrutinised. As we see in the quote here, archives have power over the shape and direction of historical scholarship, collective memory, and national identity over how we know ourselves as individuals, groups, and societies. The archive is shaped by decisions about what is preserved, what is discarded, and whose voices are considered worthy of inclusion. This makes it both a vital resource and a site of silences that need to be carefully considered and addressed. As such, feminists and other historians have championed the role of more diverse and inclusive methods for historical inquiry, such as oral history. This book here is an important example. Oral history has the power to enable us to enter Solnit's ghost libraries, to recover the experiences, knowledge, and perspectives of people who rarely appear in traditional archives. It also allows us to understand landscapes as collective endeavours, made and remade over time through the voices of those who designed them, co-produced them, and maintained and used them. So I'll now turn briefly to some findings in my own research of the life and work of a 20th century landscape architect called Mary Mitchell, who has no institutional or personal archive and has remained largely absent from the British landscape architectural historical record. The research relied heavily on oral history as a collaborative method through which her history was constructed. Mitchell, seen here, was born into a farming family in Wiltshire in 1923. After the war, she trained as a landscape architect at the School of Planning in London and gained accreditation as a landscape architect in 1955. After several years working at Stevenage, Newtown, she went on to work at Birmingham City Architects Department for 6 years, where she set up the first landscape department. Mitchell developed an innovative approach to playable housing landscapes, and after she left Birmingham, she set up her own practice, which she ran until her death in 1988. By bringing together a list of projects that had been published in the landscape and architectural press, as well as various international publications, it became clear that she had been a prolific designer with an international reputation. However, beyond the professional press, finding information about her and her landscapes proved difficult, and it relied on extensive searches of colleagues who had worked in her practice and could begin to extend knowledge of her life and work through oral history. This information was then corroborated through cross-checking archival documents, and a fuller history came into view. One example of a project that hadn't been found in published material is the More Close housing development in Cumbria. No plan drawings, sketches or photographs could be found of the scheme, and as such, in order to reconstruct Mitchell's design, this was done through visiting the site and working with local residents. Once on site, Mitchell's signature design interventions were legible across the landscape. In almost all of her sites, she used sculpted mounds, often clad in cobbles, that would then be integrated into the landscape with slides and other playful features designed to allow children to engage directly with the terrain. Up more close, traces of these interventions remained, with at least 17 locations showing evidence of where slides of different sizes had once been fixed to a series of mounds. Further understanding of the site was developed through engaging with the local community through oral history, which helped to reconstruct the history and use of the landscape. Conversations with residents revealed the extent to which the design landscape had become embedded in everyday life and local identity. One long-term resident who had lived on the estate since childhood described how the mounds and slides formed the backdrop to her own early play and now shaped her daughter's experience in similar ways. She was able to describe how the spaces were used and by whom, bringing the landscape to life through lived memory. It was through engagement with the community that it became clear that the housing management company had removed the slides from the site during COVID as a way of deterring social gatherings, and they didn't plan to reinstate them. Subsequently, I worked with the 20th Century Society to bring awareness to the removal of the slides as a way of petitioning for their reinstatement. The campaign was ultimately unsuccessful, but the findings show how oral history can illuminate not only the embeddedness of design landscapes in community life, but also the processes of landscape change. How landscapes are adapted, eroded or reshaped through everyday use, management decisions and shifting social needs. It makes visible management practices that may undervalue or erase cultural significance of these landscapes, accelerating forms of change that are otherwise undocumented. Briefly, a second example also in Cumbria is Bowth Community Village Green, a very small-scale project. Through oral histories and shared material from the local community, it became clear that the scheme was first taken on by landscape architect Derek Lovejoy, with Mitchell assuming responsibility in 1969. The project was made possible by the Local Government Act of 1958, which enabled communities to acquire and develop land for public open spaces and playing fields. Using this provision, residents in Bowth applied to convert an area of previously neglected land into a village green. Mitchell acted as their designer, creating this sketch plan, but the physical labour of construction was carried out collectively by village residents themselves. In this example, oral history and community archives were able to reveal the many-layered nature of landscape production that encompasses diverse forms of hidden labour and funding bids that facilitate landscape and change. And then finally, I want to touch on an innovative method that's been supported that has supported my own research into Mitchell and her landscapes, called HistoryPin. This was a tool used by Professor Lutza Sepley-Noor at Liverpool in her AHRC-funded project called Women of the Welfare Landscape. The project mapped women's contributions to post-war landscapes, combining traditional archival research with oral history. HistoryPin is an open access digital platform that allows users to upload photographs, documents and memories to specific geographic locations. It therefore brings together historic plans and photos with contemporary site photographs and community submissions, revealing layers of landscape change that traditional archives struggle to capture. It also enables the inclusion of material typically excluded from formal archives, such as mixed media material, and conveys lived experience, everyday use, and the gradual evolution of a place. In the context of Mitchell, we see here photographs of a project called Markfield Play Space in Tottenham. A series of photos had been shared with me again through the oral history process, revealing much about this important Mitchell site and also the community that it had served. These photos were put on History Pin, and subsequently a community member shared photos of the site as it is today. This made it possible to observe and trace landscape changes over time. And in turn, it as an approach, it turns static collections into living, evolving histories. Engaging with the archive in this way reveals the collaborative potential of digital tools to make landscape history more accessible, interactive, and attentive to change over time. And so to close, oral history and co-produced archives offer important methods for understanding sites that go beyond what traditional archival research can reveal. They provide insights into landscape change, uncover previously unknown sites, modes of construction, patterns of funding, and represent the lived conditions and ongoing processes through which landscapes are continuously made and remade. In doing so, they generate important data, not only for historical record, but also for preservation, management, and contemporary design practice. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Joy, for this really interesting, exciting, and engaging presentation. I'm looking forward to learn more about it. We are already getting some questions, but in the Q&A time. So I think this makes a very good introduction to Dr. Yang Shen's presentation. Our third speaker for the day. Dr. Yang is an associate professor and doctoral supervisor at Tongji University. His research centers on the conservation and planning of cultural landscape heritage with particular expertise in digital and intelligent conservation technologies. He has led national level research projects, contributed to digital conservation planning for World Heritage Sites, and major cultural landscapes. He will be talking to us today about digital perception and innovative conservation of heritage landscapes, theory, technology, and people, which I think bends beautifully with what Joy was actually telling us. Please, Dr. Yang, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mehan. It's a great pleasure to be here. I think it's a very important topic in terms of the methods of identifying and also understanding landscape changes. So as introduced by Mehan, I think I'm working at Shanghai in Tongji University in landscape architecture department. And my focus is about the digital conservation of cultural landscape heritage. And we have been working on the documentation, management, and interpretation of the three subcategories of cultural landscapes according to the World Heritage Convention. So basically the designed landscape, gardens, parks, and the organically evolved landscape, mainly rural landscape areas, and also historic urban landscapes. And at the same time, we have been working on the associative cultural landscape with big nature areas, but with a very strong and deep cultural attachments. So my team has been focusing on the application of digital technologies and using them to enhance our perception and understanding of landscape places, at the same time supporting the management plan and also the restoration interpretation of heritage landscapes. I think digital tools are not only providing new approaches, but also new perspectives. We have unprecedented perspectives looking at those landscapes, and also at the same time is providing all the people and good opportunity to access those landscapes in not only 3D, but also 4D to 5D. So this is something we did for World Heritage Training and Research Center in Shanghai under UNESCO. We did it as research about the relationship of the digital revolution timeline and the World Heritage timeline. We see that the digital technology actually providing very important contribution to the global understanding of what is World Heritage. And since 2003, they have been developing a lot of chatters, guidelines, and also principles on the digital conservation of heritage sites. So I think for cultural landscape heritage as a very important World Heritage category, it has special features compared with other different heritage categories. It has very multi-scale spaces and very dynamic components. You need knowledge from different disciplines. Also, you always have people living in the landscape, so you have very diverse stakeholders and development needs. So that's what I mean for a landscape perspective in heritage conservation. We need more and more heritage information supporting all your decisions and understandings of it, from a single discipline to interdisciplinary collaboration and public participation in the conservation process. So my work, my presentation will be covering all the different types of digital technologies supporting heritage conservation, at the same time with some international case studies and also with my research projects. So in terms of recording and documentation of heritage tools, we have camera devices methods, and if we have photographic and scanning methods, we have remote sensing and geodetic techniques. So that providing us unprecedented opportunities to looking at our landscape from different angles at any time we want. And also we can identify the changes, according to the characteristics of the landscape. So as some examples, this is Venice. You can see that with the 3D scanning models, they can have very accurate recording, and also the perception of the urban structure and also the public spaces. And they can identify heritage changes quickly, and also in different scales. This is another example showing us the robot actually doing the automatic surveying at the historic city of Bombay. And also you have drones with laser scanners on the top. Actually, we don't need a lot of human beings participation in the data collection process. So it's providing us new approaches of collecting data, and at the same time, we have to consider about what are the contributions of human beings in the whole process of landscape surveying. This is another example showing us what can be achieved to have this digital documentation. This is Dunhuang Academy providing this very exciting exhibition in Hong Kong. You see all this documentation of the Dunhuang Macau grottos without flying over to China. And this is our project. We were using UAV, multispectral sensors, machine learning to identify the rural landscape features, and it's automatically by machine learning. I think we're going to talk about this in the future, because in rural landscapes, you're not only covering the cultivated areas, the settlements, but also the natural environments, to providing us what is local people's understanding of the environment, what are the environmental wisdom has been transcended for generations. I don't want to go too much about the details, but actually we were using this imaging tools and also machine learning tools to get the images to be vector data, can be quantitatively analyzed. And also we did interview with people to understanding their emotional attachments to the landscapes and supporting us to better use the digital tool. And at the same time, the digital transformation of heritage and landscape documentation is expanding our ability to perceive landscapes with unprecedented perspective, enhancing the richness and landscape records and documents, opening landscape documentation process to provide greater opportunity for public participation, and also improving the accessibility of landscape information. And also for monitoring and management tools, we have more devices like remote monitoring, geospatial mapping systems, building information platforms. Here are some examples of the World Heritage Center. They are using better and better satellites to have much more clearer satellite images of the geographic area. This is Arches from Getty Center. I think this is one of the most successful and popular landscape heritage or cultural heritage management system. This is our recent project. We did Lushan is a World Heritage landscape cultural landscape site. We were using this modeling and and analyzing tools to understand what is a microclimate of this villa. At the same time, using this 3D scanning document, and at the same time to understand the growth rate of the trees. And then we can go back to understand what are the historical characters of this villa based on the growth rate of different plants. So the digital transformation for heritage monitoring and management actually is expanding the scope and precision of monitoring, integrating fragmented landscape information resources to strengthen the link between heritage science and decision making, and enabling automated monitoring, real-time response, and dynamic management of landscape supporting cross-border collaborative monitoring. And lastly, in terms of the interpretation and presentation tools, we do have information modeling, AR, VR, MR, and interactive computational tools and methods. We have a lot of platforms supporting different types of interpretation and presentation of our landscape environment. So during the COVID, most of the World Heritage sites are closed. So there are a lot of online and visiting opportunities provided by live camps. And also with AR technology, you can actually bring the World Heritage sites or landscape heritage sites into your living room. You can have a better, experience compared with the previous technologies. This is a game designed by the Italy heritage conservation team, which uses a lot of figures and stories and meanings in Venice to creating this interactive game, so people playing and learning about heritage places. This is our project. We were designing this AR application in the standstill what natural heritage site in China, because it's hard for the public to understand what is a geological process, and at the same time the geological features and vegetations and local animals, all these very important features for the OUV of this World Heritage site. We need to enhance people's experience in the World Heritage area. So the digital transformation of heritage landscape interpretation, providing novel platforms, reducing the cost, increasing the flexibility, and breaking the restriction of time and space, providing digital twins of landscapes close to the original scene, providing a deeper impression by presenting richer landscape information, and also providing very diverse narratives, not only, as mentioned by the previous speakers, not only by the researchers, the expert professionals, but also the local people, the communities. We can include more voices in our interpretation. So finally, this is our publication. So if you are interested, you can have a look about, and also, as I mentioned, there are a lot of books on digital heritage. I think most of them are about technologies, and a few of them about theory. But I think we do need more and more publications and research about people. What are the relationship between people and those technologies and those landscapes? Okay, thank you very much. That's my presentation. If you have any comments or questions, you are very welcome to share and talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yang, for this really insightful presentation. I think you took us to the digital world with great enthusiasm, and also you presented it very clearly. Now, for a person who is not that into digital methods, I think I get I get it very clear. So now for our last but not least speaker, Dr. Aisha Chabi, who will also be going with us into machine learning. Well, Dr. Aisha specializes in advanced remote sensing, GIS, and machine learning applied to agriculture and environmental challenges. Her research focuses on early and automated mapping of land use and crop dynamics, particularly in cereal systems, to assess rapid landscape change and climate-related risks, such as drought and heat waves. She's experienced in integrating multi-source spatial data to support planning, risk assessment, and evidence-based land management. She's an assistant professor at the National Agronomic Institute of Tunisia. So her presentation today will be about machine learning-driven multi-sensor remote sensing for landscape change detection, automated early classification of cereal covers in central Tunisia. So thank you, Aisha, for accepting our invitation for today, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Merham. Good morning, everyone. You can see my screen. Okay, thank you. So thank you for the Landscape Research Group to invite me, and it's a pleasure to be part of this event. Today, I will present the work of my research lab, Green Team, focusing on innovative methodology for understanding landscape change. In fact, I will illustrate how we integrate multi-source remote sensing data with machine learning, AI, to decode and anticipate transformation within semi-arid agriculture system. And especially, I will focus on the automated early classification of cereal cover as a key indicator of agro-environmental change. And we will understand why I choose this. So let's start with reality and take a look at these two photos from El Dam in central Tunisia. And that illustrates how fast hydrological systems are degrading in our region in Tunisia and the impact of the drought on this region. In fact, rising temperature and increasingly erratic rainfall are reshaping the water cycle, and this puts our farmers and food production at risk. Under this escalating water stress, cereal production becomes the most vulnerable component of our food systems. So we can see here that this vulnerability has a direct impact on national security. So as we can see here, Tunisia relies on import for over 76% of its cereal consumption. So making us highly sensitive to global markets, shocks, and local drought effectively. So this raises a critical operational question. How can we secure cereal supply chains under such uncertainty? So our response is simple yet ambitious. So we need early, robust, and spatially explicit cereal classification in Tunisia. And we need to move from simple observation to anticipatory intelligence to get resource allocation before the harvest even happen for cereal, of course. So let's move for a region that is considered for us, for the Green Team, a pilot region. So it's the governorate of Kairouan, and this region is not just a typical semi-arid landscape. In fact, it plays a critical strategic role for Tunisia food security. Why? In fact, because of its dual nature. It combines rain-fed lands with vast irrigated perimeters. So during the drought event that we have this last decade in Tunisia, and when rain-fed crop fail across the rest of the country, so Kairouan acts as a national safety net. Its irrigated system save the national cereal production. But this resilience maintain this high production, the landscape is subjected to immense pressure. We see an explosion of illicit wells, leading to alarming overexploitation of groundwater that is important in this region. So this makes Kerwen a dynamic but highly fragile agro-ecosystem, perfect for testing our monitoring tools. So here, to monitor cereal in near real time at a regional scale is technically challenging. So for years, in fact, our lab green team, with the collaboration of CESBio Toulouse, we produced high quality land cover maps, but they were often limited to specific season or required heavy manual validation. They lacked temporal scalability. So our goal here in this study was to bridge this gap. We suggested that by using machine learning, we could build an early season classifier calibrated on a single reference year, but this model is robust enough to be deployed automatically across multiple past and future years. So I will not detail this, but the most important of the approach that we developed, that the foundation of this machine learning model depends on the quality of the ground truth data. So to build this model, we didn't just rely on satellite imagery like Sentinel-2, Landsat 8, 7, and 5, but we based our work on ground truth observation collected directly in the field and from many years, of course. So from satellite data, it is essential to fully capture the complex phenological dynamic of the crops. And then these inputs served to the model. And finally, it was evaluated month by month from November to the end of the season to determine how early we could produce accurate map. So exactly, we established our calibration backbone using a reference here, and it's correctly classified and with good precision. And this reference configuration provided a robust baseline for temporal generalization and for testing early season scenarios. And to determine the earliest reliable detection window, we conducted a systematic test. We evaluated this model performance with a monthly time set, running simulation from the start of the season, November, to the end of the season, June. That the window, the perfect window, is from November to February. And why is this significant? Because this specific offers the best balance between high accuracy and earliest in the season. And exactly, it allows us to freeze the prediction and deliver a reliable map 4 months before harvest. Using this baseline, we traveled back in time. We applied the model automatically from 2010 to 2022 in this region. And in fact, the system is able to detect cereal also, cereal field 4 months before harvest. And despite the variability of climate over these 12 years, the model is so, and that proves that the early season classification is strong enough for long-term operational monitoring. We don't finish our work. So this for the current 24-25 season, we scaled this approach to the 6 major cereal productive governorate in Tunisia. So we were able to produce a national early season. This proves that our modeling framework is not just a local experiment at a region scale, but it's transferable to different agroclimatic contexts at operational scale. So the contribution of this work extends far beyond simple mapping. It establishes a scalable digital infrastructure for the three key pillars: yield prediction and food security, of course, and also crop management, optimizing irrigation and fertilization, and quantifying the overexploitation of the groundwater. And thirdly, policy and planning, supporting evidence-based agriculture strategy and decision makers. But importantly, these tools give us deep insight into landscape dynamics by capturing spatial and temporal shifts in cropping early in the season. Our maps reveal exactly how climate stress and water scarcity are reshaping agricultural landscape in real time. Multi-sensor satellite data with intelligent AI, we have demonstrated the accurate, early, and scalable serial detection. It is national scale. This is exactly the type of intelligence we need to understand landscape change and ensure food security in changing climate. And thank you for thank you very much. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Aisha, for this interesting approach. So, and thanks to all our speakers today. So this concludes our talks, and we can now include the audience for any questions and discussions. I can see some questions in the chat box, so maybe I can start with them.
Melham, because I've set this up as a webinar, I need to allow individuals to talk. So as you're asking a question, if you have asked that question, I will hit the allow to talk button. So you should be able to then unmute yourselves. I apologize. I think meetings are probably easier in future.
Okay. So we have a question to Dr. Joy. Charlotte, no, it's from Ali, if I'm pronouncing it right. So what are the reasons that the playground wasn't eligible for listing or protection or restoration? Not even local heritage listing. I think they're referring to the playground that you were mentioning.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think there's probably several issues at play. Firstly, the response came back was that if the slides have already been removed, then arguably the value of the landscape itself was already lost, despite the fact that they were still housing these slides. And of course, the value was much more than just the slides themselves. So that was their formal reason. But I think more broadly, 20th century landscapes often fail to be listed because they're often not recognized as meeting the criteria for national significance. And I think that's because research on 20th century landscapes and landscape architecture is still very much developing, and the post-war landscape period is only just beginning to be recognized for its design value. So I think they're probably the main two reasons. It's also worth saying that Mary Mitchell herself, who was a prolific designer and was really internationally recognized, designed some very large scale significant post-war landscapes. We sort of also applied for a blue plaque for her, and the response just came back as a straightforward no. And so getting individuals and landscapes recognized is a frustrating and difficult process.
So another question also directed to you, Joy, from Matthias. Well, they thank you for the clear and engaging presentation. and with particular attention to the methods. How were the interviews structured, and how did you work with them analytically? How is this material processed and eventually disseminated into broader academic and disciplinary discourse? There is part two of the questions, but maybe you can answer this and then back.
Yeah. So in terms of how the oral histories are structured, there are many ways to approach it, and I think it's quite context dependent. So you can include like a series of set questions, adopt a particular methodology that ensures kind of objectivity as much as is possible. A kind of a feminist approach very much kind of recognizes positionality and recognizes oral history as being a kind of an interaction, and you try and in some ways for the interviews themselves remove a sense of hierarchy and try and engage with the person or people that you are interviewing as a kind of a shared means of exchanging information. And that was broadly how I adopted my approach. I then think in terms of how that transitioned from from that as a method and approach through to academic writing and research. I mean, a lot of it's through triangulation. So it's how you then handle that data afterwards. So it's about mapping it against consistency of voice with what you can find in any published material or archival research. From my experience, oral history very much provided the starting block from which information was then later shared. So there would be an initial interview that proved really important for understanding very personal insights, but almost the bits that make it into academic writing are often to do with, a kind of years later sharing of information. So communities often uncover data that does represent, more traditional archival type material, whether it's old letters or photographs, some of which you saw today. And I think it's through that longer term engagement with individuals on a local site that can really unlock sites that wouldn't that aren't in institutionalized archives for whatever reason, whether they're not deemed significant. And so, yes, it's the interview itself and how you approach that methodologically. It's the bit afterwards, which is about thinking about co-producing material and broadening where we think we can get material from. And that's often from individuals and communities that hold things in local village halls that they don't, they look after it, but haven't done anything particularly with it. And then the writing of it is the kind of the bringing the two together and sort of mapping that against what you might then be able to find or trace in more institutional archives. So I see it as a kind of a step in that sense. In terms of making sure the voices are heard, I think it's about bringing the individual voice into the academic writing as well, alongside the more traditional forms. I don't know if that answers it.
Okay, for the second part is beyond oral histories, what other tools or materials could be mobilized to trace these forms of informal processes and formations? How do we locate and identify such forgotten voices in the first place? And finally, how we might teach students to become more attentive to these overlooked legacies and forms of knowledge within landscape and urban practice. I think also Sonia can reflect on this after Joy, if you have something to add.
So for me, I think a bit the key really is broadening where we get data from as best we can. So historically we have relied almost entirely on archives, really. And I think it's about community engagement and not sort of seeing that as a separate disciplinary approach, but recognizing it as integral to the historical method. And I think that can take many forms. So that can, a broad sense of community engagement. I know a project in Copenhagen. They sort of put on an exhibition about an unknown female landscape architect, and found that people who attended the exhibition were then able to say, "Oh, I know this person. I've got a photograph of this person. I know." And being open to where your data can come from can allow a kind of a rich data set. But there isn't always a very clear path. And that is the nature of this kind of research. Often it's about trying something and getting nothing, trying something else in another area, and until you start to find. And frustration and failure is very much at the heart of how you find these tiny fragments that build up a picture. And in terms of how we can use it in teaching, I mean, including these kinds of approaches in projects, I think is great, but also exposing students to an understanding of methods that teaches beyond just the archive, and includes it as an important method when we teach history and theory.
Thank you, Joy. Yeah, Sonia, would you like to?
Yeah, I think that's really. I think I feel less confident than Joy on talking about the archives, but I do think about the archives a lot, and I did use them in my own research. And I think in terms of how do we locate and identify such forgotten voices in the first place, well, I was able to find kind of two approaches. One is maybe a Saidia Hartman approach. She's, I think, a professor of literature in Columbia, but she writes about she writes about like work reading against the grain, to look for kind of to look for voices, to look. She's writing about the experience of enslaved women, and how do you write about this like racial and sexual violence in the American context when the archives are, as Joyce said, so curated to produce certain narratives. And she has a lot methodologically that I think is really interesting about like the act of reading the archives being this very living phenomenon. And then for me, I think as like a white person in the archives, I think there's a way of reading with the archives, instead of against, where you read the archives as what they say about the absent, like you can read them almost as like biographies of settler colonial anxiety overcompensating for their lack of epistemic belonging. So you can kind of read like through the violence of it, kind of like you can see the cracks in the thing of the apparatus of the state through reading them quite critically. And then how do we teach? Yeah, and then on to the pedagogical aspect. How do we teach students to become more attentive to these overlooking legacies? So I teach law students, and I try and encourage them to read laws as biographies, or like to actually take this more textual approach to reading laws as a thing that is so that as a thing that is multivocal, and contains in it all these biographies and emplaced histories of like what justice is, and to be able to read, to bring like humanity and to these legal texts that pretend to be very distant and remote. I think that into the law classroom, that ends up. I think that for me is a really interesting way to get students to like rethink rethink the authority of laws.
Thank you, Sonia. Actually, in my mind, I was connecting archives to laws, and I'm not an expert in either, but I was thinking maybe we can also see this kind of similarity between archives and laws. How do we read them? Who added them? Yeah. So for Dr. Yang, actually, you mentioned that you also connect people's perceptions within the digital mapping, and how you should actually get them to the foreground. I think this also might be interesting. What methods do you use to actually integrate people's perceptions and stories within the digital mapping tools and methods? And how do we teach this in our classrooms? We have.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I also see a question in the
Yes.
discussion panel. I think this is very important because while we have so many different technologies supporting the landscape perception, we still need to relying on the basic methods of getting a good understanding of what is the interaction and the relationship between people and the local environment in the beginning before we start to apply all these tools. So in the project I mentioned, we did a long research in the villages before we really taking all these drones, scanners, and also the group of surveyors to the site, because you need to understand the evolution of the place and when people started to stay here and what was the main principle the selecting this place and what were the knowledge created in the history. So in the process, we are not only relying on the heritage conservation framework, but also we just have, using this very very traditional methods of living with people and staying with them in weeks and trying to understand their behavior. And also we did an interview with photographs. We send in people an interview sheet, and at the same time we're asking them to provide a certain number of pictures of their daily life in landscapes. So many of them did that, and we did a good group interviews together. So we started to understand what are the people's understanding of the place and what are the most important features in the village. And at the same time, what are the emotional connections between them and their village. And finally, we improved our mapping program. We understand we are not only covering the settlement itself, not only some of the important architecture, architecture or planting areas, but also the whole landscape is mapped by the whole program. So actually, we are breaking what we believe it is important as heritage items, and also we understanding people's emotional attachments to the place. And just read the questions in the discussion panel. How might social gathering fight landscape research? I think that's important because our project was back to, but now I think we have more technologies to understand what people's reactions in the place. We can do a lot of things actually. If people are looking at the place, if people are walking around, are moving around the place, you can see very, very detailed reactions from their face and also from their eye tracking system. So we can better understand a bigger group and also in very detailed features of people's reactions to a landscape. I think it's all providing opportunities, but I still believe good tools not means better research. We still need to get better understanding of the place. Thank you.
And in this sense, Aisha, do you have experience with integrating people's perceptions and understanding more about people? And I assume you work more with farmers while mapping the different environmental challenges that crop agriculture faces in Tunisia?
Yes, we did this in the presentation I showed that we actually using multispectral imagery to get all the crops or cultivated areas being mapped. And at the same time we were doing comparison between the current cultivating land and the previous maps. So we understood what are the changes happened in this area, in the agriculture practice in this area. Actually, that's pretty efficient because when you have a vector map with everything georeferenced, you can compare with a very clear result, what happened on the site. So it is very important. You're right. Basically we have to understand what are the cultivation practice and what's happened in the landscape. And I think now with more and more mapping tools happen, like photogrammetry or LiDAR, we can we can we can design the monitoring scheme to fit the local landscape characteristics, because all the different landscape are changing different ways. They have their own characteristics. So we have to understand that, and then guiding the design of the digital applications.
Thank you, Yang. Aisha, would you
Yeah.
like to comment?
Yes. So for the question, I see the question of the question.
I think no, we can go back. You're breaking up, Aisha.
Of Laila. So
You're breaking up a bit, so we don't hear you clearly.
you hear me? So you hear me
Yes,
now?
now we can. Maybe you can. Yes, but you break up sometimes. So maybe if you are more comfortable turning off your camera, maybe this might help, but it's okay for now.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, I was asking you to if you have a comment on using more methods to understand people's perception on the agricultural land, their behaviors, their changes in lifestyles, while also doing your mapping, digital mapping, to understand the landscape change. Did you have any experience in this area?
With the local people,
Yes.
with the local people,
Yes.
in fact, no, but we are focused on the decision makers in Tunisia, because we have a problem of food security. So it's important for us to have this prevision, this estimation of the landscape, and especially not for the cereal, because we do for all the crops in the site, in the region, but we focus particularly on cereals. So, but with the local people in the region, no, we don't have this experience.
Okay, so for the other questions we have in the chat box, there is I think they can be a very generic questions to Yang and Aisha. Is there a preferred general approach for systematically integrating landscape as a resource into development policies? And what are the limits and scope of using artificial intelligence in the production of landscape approaches to local development? So Aisha, if you'd like to comment first, and then we can go back to Yang.
Yes, another time. I think that by providing early serial maps in February, so 4 months, months before harvest, we enable proactive import planning. So this allows the state and the decision makers to negotiate contract ahead of time, avoiding expensive emergency purchase on the spot market and the quantity of the cereal that will be imported. So the direct result is the preservation of foreign currency reserve and enhanced national security throughout this data that are derived by capping, remote sensing, and machine learning. In summary, the preferred approach is to move away from top to down. I think that static planning and toward evidence-based, also adaptive management, where technology serves as the bridge between the agro-environmental reality and the political action. So that for the first question. And for the second question is the limit and scope of using artificial intelligence in the production of landscape approach. Of course, there are some limits. In my presentation, I focus on it. So the ground truth data, the ground truth dependency is unimportant for all the model, the AI model. And and is good. We can say that it can be good as the data we feed it. So that's the first point. But also, I think that the social dimension of landscape is important to introduce in this model, because in this last years we observe a big change in the landscape, and the local people are adapted to the climatic change in the region. So I think that is important to take a consideration about the social dimension of landscape. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Yang, would you like to comment on these questions?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very important question. I think, obviously AI can play a very important role to connecting landscape resources and local development, because we're always talking about the tourism development and also landscape heritage conservation. But I think AI could be a very great tool to supporting the connection of landscape heritage values and the local tourism development. But also as a limitation, I think artificial intelligence is still under human control. We always need to set clear instructions to them. Otherwise, AI may be biased, and problem will arise if many landscape values are not included. So that is why, a lot of local communities can be part of that process with the supporting AI. I see a great potential, but I think it also has its limits. We should realize it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that Joy, you mentioned something about integrating digital methods for your online archiving and also allowing the residents to add more photos to the same archives that you are trying to build. But I'm a bit curious about the process. Why did you utilize HistoryPin website in particular? Why not something like Google Maps yeah, I'm just curious about this process. How did you reach this? Because it's not a very well-known, for example, website. So do you have?
Actually, the honest answer is that formed part of Professor Lutz's AHRC project, and all of those decisions were kind of made before me. So I can't answer that. All I know is that I benefited from it in terms of my own research. I'm sure there are many, many platforms and ways of doing it. But I think for that, the importance is, the outreach and the ability to be able to create kind of profiles of projects that are mapped against location, and then the ability for people to upload their own findings. There may be better ones out there that do that, but I think I'm sure thought was given to that. It may be something about the creation of those, the kind of the different data, whether it's putting the individual together with the sites and the kind of bio information. But that's all I have on that.
Okay, thank you. And I think maybe Sonia, if you can also reflect more about maybe the limitations and the potentials of engaged ethnography as a method for understanding landscape in law and beyond law, because many of us use also engaged ethnography. So if you can speak to us more about the limitations that you faced, that might be interesting for our audience.
Yeah, the pros are also quite self-evident in that, especially international law is this very standardized project that's based on abstractions, and I think the depth and like the depth and meaning it becomes very, it becomes a lot more interesting, and I think a lot better research with that engagement. And it's also like bringing vulnerability into the research design. So I think international lawyers, or sometimes like the comfort of like the distance that doctrinal research puts between you and the world. So it is very vulnerable. But that being said, then it also introduces a lot of complexity, especially in the context of ongoing legal cases. So some of my cases that I researched, there are people who even if people agree or to be there, you also don't want to you don't want to in the context of ongoing litigation or harm, you have to be so careful to like beyond, like I think like the ethical duties it goes beyond, I think, like the beyond the very high threshold that already exists for very good reason, but there's other complexities. One thing that I'm grappling with in terms of the limitations is in my case studies, and I only very, very briefly looked at the one because to be honest, I couldn't see the clock, so I wasn't sure if I was way over or way under. But in all the cases I looked at, there are people who themselves were drawing on international law, but they were being unrecognized in the court process. And in this one really nasty case, actually in Namibia, which you might be interested in, the kind of respondent, like the state, was drawing on the work of ethnographers to say these people aren't a rational community. Look, even these ethnographers, because they were drawing on ethnography that was trying to criticize the demarcation of local communities in these Eurocentric terms, saying this is a bad way to divide up the world. It doesn't make sense. And this was then taken up in the legal process as them saying, see, even ethnographers agree that these people lack rational, they aren't organized rationally in these units, and these words are being actually being used against the community. So I think that's something I'm also so scared about, in that you don't want to accidentally undo any progress that's been made. So for the fact that there is like types of land-based rights for communities who don't own the land in terms of private title, but you don't want to undo that by becoming by being too critical of the edifice by which groups are legible before the law, to the point that can then be used to say, see, there's no such thing, to get too postmodern and like disintegrate the entire all the work that's been made up to this point.
Yeah, I see the point. And also, I think it has an element of breaking the silos between the different disciplines, because sometimes when you use methods coming from other discipline, it might not be taken so well or so profound on other disciplines. So I understand. And that's why I think it's also important to understand how do we borrow from other disciplines. And also it's our duty to learn more about different methods, also to integrate them into the other disciplines, because this is how actually we can progress different sciences, especially in the current complexities that we are all facing in the different disciplines. Thank you, Sonia. So I think we are approaching our end time, but so the final call for any final questions to our speakers today from the audience, if anyone would like to share their question. Sarah, you say that they cannot unmute themselves, right?
I've unmuted everyone. I found out how to do it. Sorry.
Okay. So please, if anyone would like to, we have a question in the chat box just popping up. So for Joy, okay, maybe I need to read it all. The question is around researching oral histories and understanding the landscapes in the academic framework. This is also linked to my personal research that looked into traditional knowledge. which includes oral means of sharing knowledge, I have questioned myself on how justified is it to conduct research on these forms of knowledge in the traditional academic methods that favor evidence-based data. What are your thoughts on this? I think this is a very valid question.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that these approaches have a place. You know, obviously, I think that within kind of traditional academic methods, and I think we now have a long established and justified tradition within feminist approach, particularly led by, you know, feminist approaches, but also decolonial approaches that recognize the shortcomings of traditional approaches and recognize that you know, through a critical lens, all things are to some extent subjective. And I think once you begin with that, you know, as your starting place, you know, then I think, you know, not that anything goes, but that we can flex. You know, these feminist approaches are as justified as other ways of accessing data. And I think you know, that's why I began my talk the way I did, as a kind of justification and a critique of very traditional ways of thinking about these things.
Yeah. I think this is really important, and that's what we were just discussing with Sonia, and also I think with Yang, where he was also emphasizing the need to integrate more of people's understanding and views and values also within digital methods of mapping, understanding, and interpretation, because this is actually what we are doing, and no further understanding without integrating more people's values on what we are studying. So yeah,
I think
totally agree.
just to follow up, you know, the reason I critique the archive is because historically it's been seen as objective fact and truth. And I think as soon as you know, really, you know, bring a critical eye and a critical lens to that, you recognize that of course these things are not objective. Of course there are decisions and finances and ways in which particular things have been remembered or assigned cultural value, and that will be true across, you know, across all of your methodologies and ways of looking at it. For me, you know, that sits within historical and archival research. For all of our speakers, you know, it'll be true in different ways.
Yeah, same for law, same for digital mapping, which is a very objective evidence-based thing, but still it might be lacking more that we didn't map or didn't take into consideration. So yeah, I think we don't have any more question. We also have big upload from Laura, our chair, for the excellent panel. And so thanks so much for sharing your interesting work and research with us. It has been our pleasure hosting you today. Really, it was very insightful, engaging, and enriching discussions. And so thanks to all. Sarah, would you like to add something?
Yeah, thanks, Mirham. It was fascinating, everyone. I just want to say, if anybody listening hasn't already signed up to be a member of the Landscape Research Group, do just visit landscaperesearch.org and hit the big orange button. We'd love to have you, and I suspect people, you know, we can provide you with an interesting network and a community. Thank you very much, everyone.
Sarah, sorry, but I missed the question. I don't know, maybe from Faye. Just last question to Dr. Yang. According to your experience in digitalizing World Heritage sites, how to reveal the values of design in particular? If you can have a short answer, because I know we are over time. I don't want to keep you more.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's also important, goes to the special categories of cultural landscapes. I think design is actually the very important historical idea about what is going to be for the heritage landscape places. So we have to understand what is the pattern of the landscape, at the same time make sure the technology actually reflecting the character of all the characteristics of the design landscape, and at the same time recording different scales landscape features. So that's why all the features are carrying that meaning and values of landscape. So in the design, actually, we need more accurate recording and the data. Yeah, thank you for that question.
So thank you all for this really interesting panel, and I looking forward to future collaborations, and keep in touch with us at the LRG. We are a very interesting group of researchers who are trying to break the silos into landscape research to actually integrate more disciplines, views, and methods. So thank you.
Thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you. Thanks to you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for speaking all. Wonderful. I shall end the session now. Thank you very much. Bye. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.